Got the great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Charles Jencks, who is also an advisor to the marathon. Our conversations over lunch have been absolutely essential to make this event happen, so we are grateful to him for speaking here today, but also for all the ideas and conversation. Charles divides his time between lecturing, writing, and designing in the US, in the UK, Europe. He's the author, similar to Richard Sennett. It's a very, very long list of books, so just a few examples. The New Paradigm in Architecture, Critical Modernism, The Architecture of Hope, together with Edwin Heathcote, The Story of Postmodernism, 5 Decades of Ironic, Iconic, and Critical Architecture. And that obviously leads us also to the current exhibition just next door here, down the road at the V&A about postmodernism. His landform projects include Landform Ueda at the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art in Edinburgh, and he's also working with CERN at the moment on a project. His very recent landscape work is summarized in The Universe in the Landscape. And then there are the gardens. We spoke a lot about Ian Hamilton Finlay and his little Sparta. We had an homage to him yesterday. Charles has also actually invented his own gardens. There are 3 gardens. There's the Garden of Cosmic Speculation in Dumfries. There's Landform Vida and Jupiter's Artland in Edinburgh. Today, Charles will talk about the universe in the landscape. As he told us before, this will have to do with his metaphysical lens. It has to do, in his own words, to see the world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower. The poetic insight of William Blake is to find relationships between the very big and small, science and spirituality, the universe and the landscape. A very, very warm welcome to Charles Jencks.
Thank you, Hans. I wonder if I should say a few words on landscape and nature and garden design first. I think it was Cicero who defined 2 types of nature, wilderness and nature which we use, that is orchards and farmyards, as nature number 2. In the Renaissance, the Italians added to those 2 natures the third nature, which is a garden, which they defined as nature improved by art. That was the Renaissance garden. And I find myself, kind of by accident maybe, working with a 4th nature, which is the cheapest nature of all, that is throwaway nature, that is our byproducts, that is pollution, that is rubbish or scrap, because clients don't have anything else to build with. So 4th nature, nature number 4, is our byproduct, that is like our perspiration. We sweat, not thinking about it, but as a result of other things, and our economy produces pollution, so I build with that scrap. And 0 nature, which is the nature underlying nature, that is to say the laws of nature, which allow all the other natures to grow. So that's to position some of my ideas. And The Universe in the Landscape is basically a book that has just been published, and I'll be speaking about that book. It is true that the famous words of William Blake are an inspiration for this book. To see a world in a grain of sand is a metaphor. To see the whole world, or for William Blake, the universe, in a grain of sand, and heaven in a wild flower, another metaphor. Hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. 4 metaphors, 4 lines, 4 translations of the very big, the universe, into the very small grain of sand. The macrocosm into the microcosm, and we're, of course, in the mesocosm. We're the middle-sized things. And the universe in the landscape is this metaphor of finding in our designed gardens or our larger landscapes the universe. So what I'm really interested in is discussed a bit in the end of the book, as Einstein called it, the cosmic religious experience, which he said very few people, very few scientists really have in a deep way, but he defined it. And It strikes me that, of course, William Blake was very involved in religions and in re-seeing religions, re-seeing a kind of an invented Jerusalem in Britain. It is said that he had his back garden as a Garden of Eden, where he would, with his wife, perform the Edenic act, much to the amusement and anger of his neighbors who would peer over the wall and think about Adam and Eve. In any case, if you think about our relation to the universe as a whole, there are many different ways we do relate. A pattern. We relate through the pattern that connects, as Bateson said. We relate through these analogies and metaphors all the way up the universe and all the way down. We relate, and this is particularly my work, relates to the units of the universe. That is, at the very smallest thing, quarks and atoms and DNA and cells, all of which I've designed and redesigned again and again and again. And then, of course, planets, galaxies, and the largest structures in the universe. All of those are my idea of what should be brought into the garden or the landscape, shrunk, if you like, from the macrocosm to the microcosm. And I'm particularly interested in turning them into architectural, sculptural, and iconic images and realities, because they have been, a lot of them have been around for 13.7 billion years, and why would you build an icon that won't last another 13.7 billion years? Why spend all that money if it's going to disappear? So I think that a language of design, language of landscape and architecture should take these units of the universe and speculate on how they can be translated into arresting and fascinating and lovable, touchable, haptic, emotional things. So you're always translating, as William Blake was doing, from one thing into another. So I'll show you quickly 4 recent projects which translate from one scale to another. If you could turn off the lights and turn off the sun and transfer us into the garden next door. It's curious. I think we're in the wrong space for this kind of projection. Can you see? A little bit. Okay. The universe in a garden. The lower right shows some of the 7 red bridges and red elements, the quark walk here, which celebrates the underlying ultimately small unit, leptons, quarks, and so forth. And because of this, I was invited to go to CERN in Geneva by the people there, the head of it, and Brian Cox and others, to do various work, and ended up working with them. And I want to show you this by way of showing the architecture at a very large scale, the size of a person. You see the person's here. This is the measuring instrument. The protons and antiprotons fly across here almost at the speed of light, hit each other, and then it's all these detectors in this radius where a shower of microparticles last for a microsecond, and then a scientist tried to decode what this all means. And it takes them months to do that. They have to look at, about 4 million events a second. So they project what they think those forms mean onto the collisions. And I noticed in the language underlying that they photograph, originally in the 60s, which led to the notion of a quark being behind an atom or under an atom. This is very beautiful language of spirals and helices in 3 dimensions, which is then photographed in 2 dimensions. So I put it over the water, which is, in reflection, is a 2-dimensional photograph of a 3-dimensional collision explosion. And thought of that, if that's really a language of nature behind nature, it can be celebrated in the garden. So by the quark walk, the eightfold way of quarks is brought to consciousness and celebrated, as well as these collision events. And you can see coming out of the collision occurs back here, is all the stuff of the universe. That's what one of the theories of the origin is, that everything comes from a kind of collision. And so all of the elements coming out of that, including our ideas of it, which is the standard model of the universe, which you can see surrounded by moss here. It says the standard model, and here are the leptons and the quarks there, and the force carriers there, and the Higgs boson, which is there. And you probably know that they've been spending something like 45 billion pounds of your taxpayers' money, including the American money too, but now the whole world has spent about that to find the Higgs boson and all the other ultimate particles. And every time they've been looking, they've found it. But the elusive Higgs, invented by Mr. Higgs, Peter Higgs in Edinburgh, not far from where this garden is, it points towards Mr. Higgs, in fact, is so elusive, so modest, and so retiring as a person, as a scientist, that he's like his particle itself. He's very hard to find. Very elusive, very fast-moving. So the Higgs isn't there, and if the Higgs isn't there, then the whole standard model and all 45 billion pounds, falls to pieces. That's why the moss is falling to pieces here, growing between the theories. So this is the most perfect theory ever invented by the human, and absolutely catastrophic if we can't find Higgs. Well, happily for me, I found Higgs in the garden. There he is, looking down at his Higgs particle, which is missing. He's glancing down. So I trapped my Higgs. And in any case, this is a good reason to build a garden, is to trap a Higgs. And from there, CERN invited me to do a garden and the center. And they're running out of property. They're a bit like Heathrow Airport. The original collider was down here, but they've grown so much like Heathrow that they really destroyed themselves in a way, at least in terms of gardens and landscape and nature. The nature has just been eaten up by success. And so I confronted this and them with the problem that they're running out of their oasis. And not only that, but the center of it, the globe, their spiritual center across from their information center where all the scientists work, is separated by buses, cars, high-speed traffic, noise, pollution, and nature number 4, as I've been calling it, all this rubbish, in effect. So with my daughter Lily and others, we formed a group called Jencks Squared, Jencks the Second Power, and created a landscape strategy, a green oasis, and are trying to save the last green area for the scientists and their globe at the center. This led to the design, and as I was explaining it, the ideas behind this design, which they need a lot of more space, so put it underground, keep it below the green. I also said they had a deficit, an iconographic deficit, in terms of communicating with the public what they're doing, how important it is. And in effect, they are the Vatican of the today, because they're trying to get back, with these collisions, to the ultimate origin of the universe. That is that's their remit, that's their brief, to find out how it all happens and what it means. Well, this is exactly what the Vatican has, for at least 13 or 1400 years claimed to be doing too. So I showed them this picture of, St. Peter's and Madama and Bramante and Borromini and Bernini, Bernini's arms, which embrace the Christian pilgrim, or the pilgrim, just the pilgrim, and at the same time allow the pilgrims to come through. It's a wonderful open and closed double screen or triple screen. And so great gatherings, great public realm happen here. And the scientists were really excited by this metaphor. They loved the idea that they could be the Vatican, so they kept saying, could you come back to that slide, please? Anyway, their iconographic deficit can be seen in this is their advertisement in kind of blue and white of, I guess, the United Nations colors scheme. It says CERN, well, that's who they are. Aimant dipole, have you loved your dipole today? You know, aimant votre dipole. I mean, really, dipoles are what magnets have, but you must love theirs. Superconductor, well, that's what the Large Hadron Collider is. So, unlike the Vatican, which hired all those architects, and from Michelangelo included, and 100,000 artists to give them an iconography, and worked it out very well, they didn't do that. So, I had to look at what scientists hold in common, what is unassailably interesting, and came finally to this diagram of a snake eating its tail, Ouroboros, 1600 BC. It was first invented by the Egyptians and the Indians. And you can see the GUT, the Grand Unified Theories here. And this is the mesocosm. This is a human couple, an ant, a mountain, the earth, the sun. And this is what we have seen. The physics has gone to metaphysics in 1600. And the other way, with the microscope, we are back to what W and Z particle, dark matter, and the very small. So the search of CERN, and this was made by Glashow, by the way, in 1977, one of the great scientists who was working at CERN. The CERN scientists still believe it. So it is both a real, truthful iconography, a diagram, in most ways, and it's one that, is kind of unassailable, or at least it's enough to hang a garden on for the next 20 years. Obviously, you have to subtract it of its head and tail, because it's not a snake, is it? The universe is not a snake. And it's a series of questions I put at the head and the tail, but and added a series of other elements which show the whole universe, as it were, in this ring, and use that as design, putting a question mark mounds at the beginning and end, because they're always asking the questions. One of the things is that, the scientists are posing these questions, and that is a suitable metaphor for them, question marks, and put the buildings and the structures they need underneath it. And this painting, watercolor of Madelon of Riesendorp, who's here, my helpmate in all things that are beautiful and well-made and skillful. She's responsible. She does, and I do all the very ugly things. So this is one of her drawings. The cosmic rings of CERN, and you can see some of the stations of the basically 15 stations picked out in different landscape ways. So the collisions are like this. If you can just barely make that out, Einstein's iconology shows the incredible pattern that connects our eyes to that measurement machine. I mean, it is incredible that these are sensors which have to watch a million events and then computerize them and then send them out for decoding. So there is an affinity, and that's why the eye of the universe recurs so much in my work. It's the closest to the brain. The second main thing I want to show, the second project, and I can see I'm not going to get through 4, is one which makes the body a metaphor between the landscape and the body. An idea which is, of course, a very traditional and ancient one, going back to Lascaux and going to the very first works of sculpture, the Willendorf Venus. And translating the far distant view for this woman in the north, this is in north of Newcastle, in Northumberland, south of these beautiful rolling hills called the Cheviot Hills or Mountains. I thought of contour mapping and using the body as a contour, just generated by contours and nothing else. Because contours give life to pathways and to the sun. And I thought, of course, also they give a drama, an end point, a walk, a narrative walk where you have a goal, the forehead of the woman. So computerizing this, which I don't usually believe in doing for landforms because a computer is kind of too precise, it gives you these beautiful colors of the slopes and tells you where there's a danger of death, of falling off. For instance, her nose is absolutely suicidal. It's a drop of 20 feet. So we have to keep people from walking on it. And she's pointing to various signs here to engage you in this walk. She's a quarter of a mile long, so to get people to walk in a 50-mile-an-hour wind, or the rain, which often happens in Northumberland, is a challenge. The forehead, as I say, is the goal. You come through this very nice, quiet, understated wood with ferns by your feet, and then you see straight ahead these abstract forms, and you begin to understand them and walk the walk if you head toward her feet. And you can see that a lot of it is very abstract. So I'm trying to play a game of an abstract landscape versus a representational set of parts, each of one which has to hide you and protect you from the high winds and the rain. So you can see sometimes her hip gets carved into by a space for a family to have a picnic in. It's so big that half the time you have no idea that it's a woman, and the other time you're brought up short by her. Maybe time for one more quick look at the translation of the very big into the small and the small into the very big. It's the Scottish landscape project called Scotworld Scotland, which is on the M90, just north of Edinburgh, across the Firth of Forth Bridge, dealing with the fact that if there are 5 million Scottish living in Scotland today, there's something like 40 million Scottish of descent who live around the world. And one of the people who fascinate me, Arthur Herman, has written a book, How the Scots Invented the Modern World. His argument is that in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, they went around the world and brought in a kind of enlightenment, a Scottish enlightenment and modernity. So this became the pretext for a mappa mundi and the 4 continents. Again, one of Madelon's watercolors here with the winds. Again, high wind, by the way, is really a constant of these very large landscapes. And you can see the 4 continents there, the European and Polish. The 30,000 Scots went to Poland in the 1600s and settled there, forming an amazing community called Old Scotland today in Gdansk, Danzig. And if you go there today, you meet Gordianskis with red hair and so forth. Well, they don't have any money. They're coal men. They don't do art in the normal sense, and all they have is scrap. So flying scrap is what I use to construct the different continents. And you can see Europe here made out of what they do have are large boulders. The 18 cities they centered in, including Danzig and Gdansk, as well as an avenue of doubles which focuses on important landscape features and focuses on the other mounds that are being made. Built out of their incredible machinery parts. I mean, if you look at some of these machines, they're larger. The whole machine is larger than a house. And used sewer pipes which focus the view on a volcano which is 350 million years ago. The one in the volcano line that, of course, Arthur's Seat and Edinburgh are also on. The last project, until I'm stopped by Hans, am I about to be stopped? Oh, okay, is looking at the microcosm, shrinkage down, finding the universe in a cell. These are pictures from The Guardian, the front cover of The Guardian on your right, and the Science magazine on your left. 4 cells, human cells dividing, and on your right, 8 cells, which are seen through a micrograph. Absolutely fascinating, both images. The 4-cell micrograph shows a 5th cell just beginning there to grow, and a sixth. And it shows the kind of structure, the architectural structure and beauty, the axis, north-south. Already, this is the head and the tail may be weighted here by gravity. And on your right, it shows, the fact that your 6 trillion cells know how to do all this without you even thinking. You just lie back and enjoy it, and they get on with the work. Each one is a little city of fluid, of water, with all these amazing membranes holding them all together. You have to have a membrane to have a cell, allowing things around. And if you look, I recommend this Inner Life of a Cell. If you Google that, a fantastic representation for 8 minutes of this city that each cell is, with their microtubules constructed and deconstructed automatically, with transporters taking a huge motor protein up a tubule, which will then deconstruct. So if you want to understand a cell, I don't understand this biology, but if you watch it 30 times and you listen hard, you can certainly get an intuitive understanding, and you draw the cell and redraw it and mold it and model it, and then put, the fluid around the membranes to the fluids, and you put the center of the cell as the islands with a seat showing the different cell types. There's a tree cell here. Each of these 8 cells has a center where nucleus where the DNA comes out of and is part of this walk. And maybe the most important or miraculous part of this orchestrated cell division is mitosis, or conception, meiosis, where 2 becomes 1 or 1 becomes 2. And so a fountain here is translated into the mitosis unfolding. It has the top knot which runs it all, and the water comes down and it goes through 6 different levels, and each waterfall is another part of this miraculous unfolding, architectural unfolding. I insist that it's a piece of architecture orchestrated by these little red top knots. This is the prophase, metaphase, anaphase. Beautiful unfolding in mitosis. A miracle that, 3 trillion cells become 6 trillion cells and you didn't even have to work a thing. So 2 into 1, 1 into 2 is this, the drama here. And the pattern that connects is really always being discovered. This is a recent pattern that scientists have found, that amazingly, the pattern from the atom all the way to the star is on a single line of density. You would have thought it would have been all over the place. That's what we expected to find, but no, we are universe stuff, universe beings, universe-like things, a reason that Einstein talks about the cosmic religious experience, and in this book, I try to deal with it. Thank you.